Hi, good morning, everyone. Do you know what's special about Monday morning? It gives you a start point for your journey to success for the entire week. And I think we are doing it already. So let's make the best out of it. So welcome for DGI 2020 Barbecue and Grill session. For today's session, we have Caps with us, Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, based in Hong Kong. We are so grateful to have access to the internet that we are able to do this again. Joining us again, we have Dato Sri Berhad and Impact Malaysia, and our special guest, Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperative, MIDAC. And welcome to the second edition of DGI 2020 Barbecue and Grill session. For your information, Malaysia has been part of the Doing Good Index, also known as DGI, since 2018. So CAPS started their first of its kind study showcasing factors that enable or hinder private social investment and philanthropy across Asian economies. To those who don't know about My Harapan, we are also known as the Youth Trust Foundation, a not-for-profit organization dedicated towards empowering young Malaysians by supporting youth projects and social business initiatives that contribute to nation-building efforts. My Harapan has been appointed as the local partner for Malaysia to run data collection for DGI. This moderated session will be led by Mr. Arshan Dato Ghazi, CEO of Dato Sri Berhad. Now, the session starts off with the sharing of DGI findings and followed by the barbecue and grill session joined by Datin Dr. Shahira Hamidun, Undersecretary Policy and Strategic Planning of MIDAC, and Ahmad Faris Amir, CEO of Impact Malaysia. They will share their thoughts and feedback on DGI findings and as well as discussion on regulation, incentive and grants and capacity building for the social enterprises and social delivery organization. Doing Good Index 2020 offers a way forward for government as well as private and corporate donors to meet the imperative of building a vibrant social sector for a brighter Asian future. The findings will be comprised of four elements, which are first, regulation, second, tax and fiscal policy, third, ecosystem, and fourth, procurement. Without delaying any further, we have Ruth A. Shapiro, co-founder and chief executive, CAPS, and Mehbib Mumtaz Ahmed, Director of Research, CAPS. The floor is yours, ladies.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, My Harapan, to putting this session together. And thank you very much, Dr. Shahira, for joining us today. It's an honor to be able to have a discussion with you. So CAPS is a research and advisory nonprofit based in Hong Kong, but working throughout Asia. And our mission is to increase both the quality and the quantity of private resources going toward doing good. And we really pride ourselves on trying to understand and then understanding and analyzing what really works on the ground in Asia and looking for models and strategies that make sense within the regional and context of working in this part of the world. So the Doing Good Index, well, let me just say, as we all know, can I share the screen, please? Thank you. And as My Harapan is named this, Doing Good Never Dies. And it's good to have such a positive attitude. And as an American, I feel like I can now have some hope that that's true, but that's another conversation. So can you switch to the next slide, please? So the world is is facing unprecedented challenges. And this is not a news flash to everyone. What we have found is that with COVID-19, trends that we saw in the world were accelerated. So trends around equity, trends around participation, trends around the role of civil society in community, trends around philanthropy and CSR. Those trends, which we're going to talk about today, were greatly accelerated during COVID-19. And we also know that because it is a pandemic, it is really very important that local funding addresses local issues. There's no one riding to the rescue from outside the region or outside the country. We really need to increase Asia for Asia, philanthropy and CSR, and within each Asian economy and country, increase the collaboration and cross-sector partnerships that need to be put in place in order to address our common concerns. Throughout this pandemic, the social sector has really stepped up. And when I say social sector, I mean nonprofits, social enterprises, philanthropy, CSR, all the organizations, agencies, and ways that private money is used to address a social need. And those organizations have stepped up to address the special needs caused by the pandemic at the same time as doing the work that they were doing prior to COVID-19. Next slide, please. How can we increase private resources going toward doing good? How can we create more collaborative environments? The Doing Good Index gives us 3 sets of tools: aligning incentives around doing good, mitigating the trust deficit, which exists in Malaysia, and we have statistics about the trust deficit and how to address that, and then maximizing private social investment that flows into the sector. And we're going to go through all of those in this quick presentation. So what is the Doing Good Index? We covered 18 economies, so 16 countries plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. Together with our partners, we surveyed 2,189 social delivery organizations. Those are nonprofits and social enterprises that are really on the front lines delivering social good. Our partner in Malaysia is My Harapan, and I think that My Harapan knows you are among our most valued and appreciated partners. We love working with you. Together with My Harapan, we also surveyed experts, and with all of our partners, 145 of them for this study, and we helped to author 18 economy profiles. In the case of Malaysia, it was My Harapan who was the primary author for the economy brief that is in the index. The index, as we were just heard, is comprised of 4 sets of indicators. 3 of them have to do with government regulations, which really talk about the efficiency of the sector, constraints or enablers to the flow of funding, measures to increase accountability and transparency, and communication in terms of how the government communicates with the sector and about the sector. Tax and fiscal policy are the incentives and subsidies for both giving or receiving philanthropy and CSR, as well as new types of private sector funding, such as impact investing, social impact bonds, et cetera. The third government one is procurement, which is really access to opportunities that the government can provide to work alongside government to address the needs of the Malaysian people. Ecosystem really refers to the embrace that Malaysian society has for charity, for philanthropy, for CSR, for engagement. That has to do with the public perception about nonprofit organizations, social enterprises. It has to do with recognition for these kinds of efforts. How easy is it to get talent, and what are governance principles or systems in place? And so we're going to go through those specifically for Malaysia in just a second. As you can see, Malaysia is in the doing okay category, and it actually dropped. The first Doing Good Index was in 2018, and Malaysia was in doing better. And in this iteration, Malaysia's in doing okay. And we can address why that's the case in our comments. But it means that Malaysia has the opportunity to go back up And that's really our shared goal in having this conversation. So with that, let me turn over the microphone to my colleague, Mevesh Mumtaz Ahmed, who's going to take us through the specifics regarding Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I think the great thing about the Doing Good Index is that it's not only showing us how healthy and developed the infrastructure for supporting the social sector in Malaysia is, but how it can improve. And there are clear ways, clear paths to how Malaysia can actually progress along the index and create a truly enabling environment for all kinds of social delivery organizations, including nonprofits and social enterprises. So some great news that has been coming out of Malaysia lately is that there is a growing sense that Malaysia is really not a two-sector economy. It's not just about the private and the public sector. The social sector is increasingly being seen as a partner and as the third leg of the stool in Malaysia. And if anything, COVID has really brought that into even sharper relief. Recently also through the budget and other policies that the government has been introducing, it has become clearer that the government is signaling more support for engaging with the social sector, whether it's through policies encouraging more social entrepreneurship or working with the social sector to uplift marginalized groups. But that signal is coming out. But at the same time, we know that Malaysia is also at an inflection point. Economic growth has not been the same as it was before the last few years, and COVID is further dampening that. The rise of social enterprises is a great potential game changer in the social sector, but what it actually means and what final form the social sector will take is still uncertain. And we know that funding is also becoming a problem thanks to COVID. So let's see we've grouped how Malaysia can actually help ride these headwinds and face them into three groups of indicators. Three groups of suggestions. One is we think that there is room for improved regulations and a governance infrastructure. Secondly, we believe that there is room for better incentives for giving, and this is where taxes come in. And thirdly, that there is room for greater engagement by government, and here we will speak about procurement and grants.
And let me just add that Malaysia has the most fundamental premise in place, which is that the government recognizes that the social sector is not the enemy, but a really important, maybe not trusted as much as it needs to be, but important partner in addressing shared concerns. And that notion that we can work together and we just need to find out how is a fundamental building block for all of the types of changes we're going to suggest.
Absolutely, and one that is not necessarily in place across Asia. So as Ruth said, Malaysia is actually in a good starting point where this recognition of the social sector being a partner already exists. So let's look at the first group of ways in which we think that Malaysia can actually improve on the Doing Good Index, and that's regulations. Now, regulations are important for a number of reasons, and Ruth has summarized them for you. But the two that we want to focus on right now are to do with how efficient and easy it is for social delivery organizations to set up, operate, and actually meet the social needs that deserve to be met, but also how regulations can help build greater trust in the sector. So when it comes to efficiency, we see that Malaysia has one of the fastest, quickest processes for nonprofits and social enterprises to set up. It takes only one clearance in Malaysia and 5 days. That is the lightest administrative burden across Asia. So Malaysia does superbly well over here. But we do know that then the next step for a nonprofit would be to get tax exempt status so they can deploy all of the resources that they have towards meeting social needs as opposed to having to pay income tax and other taxes on that. And here we see that Malaysian nonprofits can take up to 2 years to receive tax exempt status. And even at the end of those 2 years, the reporting requirements and the burden, administrative burden of getting tax exempt status is quite heavy.
And let me just add in here what the implications of that are. It is very understandable and commendable for a government to want to make sure before they give a coveted tax exempt status to an organization, that it is really aligned with doing the right thing, improving the community, delivering social good. But if you are paying taxes in the first 2 years, it makes the fundraising burden so much higher for those that are running nonprofits. And it's one of the reasons that it makes it, as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, are you going to create a social enterprise or are you going to create a nonprofit? Well, in the first 2 years, you're acting as a business anyway, and you're paying taxes. So the incentives that you're giving people to create these organizations need to be thought about.
Right. And again, the good news is that these laws that pertain to the social sector in Malaysia are easy to understand. That's what the nonprofits and social enterprises that we surveyed tell us, which is great. But again, there are steps that can be taken here that make them even more effective. Most of the organizations we surveyed believe that these laws are not consistently enforced. Enforcement means compliance, and that means that everyone can have greater trust in the social sector. So that's a bit of a gap that Malaysia yet has to bridge. And Malaysia is, by the way, far from the only economy in this position. This seems to be an issue across Asia. But let's talk a bit more about trust. One of the ways in which the Doing Good Index shows the importance of regulations is in highlighting how they can help build greater transparency and accountability in the social sector, which can then help mitigate the trust deficit, which is across the board one of the biggest reasons that holds back donors, philanthropists, and companies from putting more resources into the social sector. And here we see that two of the key regulations that help build transparency and accountability are actually optional and not mandatory in Malaysia. And the first of these is that filing annual reports for social delivery organizations is optional. It is not mandatory. And the second of these is that having a board that oversees the activities of a nonprofit or social enterprise are also optional and not mandatory. And in fact, we see that in Malaysia, only about 57% of social delivery organizations have a board, and Malaysia lags way behind Asia there, where that figure is almost 90%. So some of these key tenets can be further helped with regulations. But I'll add a little aside over here, which is that even if, and here's when I'm speaking to the social sector itself, even if the government is not mandating that you have to file annual reports, a good practice, best practice would be to actually make them publicly available anyway so that donors can access them. So matters can be taken into the social sector's hands here as well. So that's regulations. Let's look at the second group of ways in which we think that Malaysia can improve its performance on the Doing Good Index. And before we do that, let's look at what the funding landscape is looking like and what some of the biggest worries are. We see across Asia that foreign funding is declining in 10 out of 18 economies, and that includes Malaysia, mostly because either governments are putting foreign funding under increased scrutiny, and 6 economies in Asia are doing that, although Malaysia is not one of them. But also there is a growing recognition by foreign donors that Asia is becoming more prosperous, and Malaysia actually personifies that. Its economic progress and growth have been exemplary, even in a region that has been growing quite quickly. And that diverts foreign funding away to less well-resourced countries in the world. But how are social sector organizations responding to that? 81% who are reporting a decline in foreign funding are turning to domestic donors. And that's where the incentives for giving that the Doing Good Index highlights become so important, because they are targeted precisely towards unleashing domestic funding. And before I touch on taxes, just a quick tidbit about where Malaysia is when it comes to crowdfunding, because the social sector is increasingly turning to leveraging technology to raise resources from the masses. And in Malaysia, we find that 41% of the social sector organizations are using crowdfunding now, and more intend to, almost 70% intend to do so in the future. But let's go to tax incentives, which are one of the key ways in which incentives around giving can really be aligned and domestic resources can be pulled into the sector. We believe that there are two reasons that taxes are so important in Asia. One is that when there is a tax deduction offered for donations, people are going to give more. Companies are going to give more, individuals are going to give more. But the other reason is actually even more important, and that is the signaling effect of tax incentives in Asia. We know that in Asia, all institutions tend to work in tandem with government, and they tend to really listen to government signals. So when the government is signaling a 100% rate of tax deduction for individual or corporate philanthropy, individuals and corporations are going to sit up and take notice. And here we see that although the 100% rates of tax deduction are in place, the income on which they can be levied is actually very low. So in a sense, the government is sending mixed signals. We kind of support tax donations and giving to the social sector, but not entirely. And those mixed signals can actually be mitigated by removing these limits on income.
And just to get your competitive juices flowing, I'll just draw your attention to your neighbor Singapore on this list, which has the highest rate of tax deductions without limits in the world. And due to these incentives, a fair amount of money has been flowing into the pool of nonprofit and social enterprises in Singapore.
I'll throw another country in there. Vietnam has not only 100% rates of tax deduction, but no limits on income either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only us who are saying that these tax incentives are important. Most of the organizations that we surveyed believe that the level of individual giving in Malaysia is low, and they cite the lack of tax incentives as one of the main reasons for that.
And let me just add one point in here, please. When we look at philanthropists and companies throughout Asia, we see that the overwhelming majority want to give aligned with government. They don't want to fund anything contrary to government. So when government puts in the right incentives, more money flows into education, into healthcare, into the very issues that government itself wants to address.
I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to try and be quicker in the last couple of slides. Let's look at the third set of ways in which Malaysia can improve in the Doing Good Index, and that is through the government directly engaging with the social sector. One way the government can do that is by giving grants to the social sector, and we see that Malaysia here mirrors about the rest of Asia. But what I want to focus on is the procurement piece, especially because that does seem to be becoming a higher priority for the government in Malaysia. We see right now that only 11% of the organizations that we surveyed receive government procurement contracts, and that lags behind the 26% in Asia. But also the amounts of resources that flow to the social sector through this procurement are only about, they make up 3% of an organization's budget on average, which is half of what the budget is for the rest of Asia. But again, why do we think procurement is important, and why do we want to encourage it? Because one, it helps build the social sector's capacity, but two, it helps give the social sector legitimacy. If the government is entrusting the social sector to deliver social services on its behalf, then it signals a great deal of faith in the social sector. And that again helps to mitigate the trust deficit. I'm going to skip over that and just come on to corporate engagement, because let's not also forget the important role that the private sector can play in engaging with the social sector and what that engagement can look like. Malaysia actually outshines the rest of Asia when it comes to corporate funding flowing into the social sector, which I'm sure is great news for the government and also for the social sector. Almost 2/3 of Malaysian organizations receive corporate funding, and corporate funding on average makes up 1/4 of the budget. So we can't, although funding can always grow, I think Malaysians cannot complain that the corporate sector is not directly funding and supporting the social sector. And to their credit, the Malaysian corporate sector is engaging with the social sector in other important ways as well. We think that the corporate sector can really help transfer some skills into the social sector that the social sector is typically too under-resourced to have. Corporate volunteers can bring in financial forecasting knowledge or marketing knowledge or technical support or legal services that the social sector often needs but cannot afford. So that's why it's great to see that, again, almost 2/3 of Malaysian nonprofits actually work with corporate volunteers. But equally important is the representation of people with corporate backgrounds on nonprofit boards, because again, they help to transfer these skills and to bring in a diverse perspective onto these boards. And here we see that Malaysia mirrors the rest of Asia as well.
Except that it's only half of 57% that have boards. So
Right.
the number is still low.
Right, but those boards are reasonably well composed. Now, just a quick point on the funding before moving on to our last slide, which is that it's great that corporate funding flows into the social sector, but it does tend to perhaps flow to the bigger, well-established superstar NGOs. And that means that there might be a dearth of corporate funding for small nonprofits as well as for startup social enterprises. And we actually did a study on that, which we can discuss the findings from later if you wish. Another trend to watch, and I think we can't speak about the social sector in Malaysia without talking about the rise of social enterprises. 90% of Malaysian social delivery organizations that we surveyed say that donors are showing more interest in social enterprises. And most of them also see this as a positive, although about half of them were concerned that if the size of the pie of resources that is available for the social sector does not increase, then social enterprises and nonprofits may end up competing for the same slice of that pie. So that's something to keep in mind. And what you see on the right of the slide are some of the findings from our comparative study on social enterprises that came out last year. Although we did not cover Malaysia directly in that, we did cover 6 other economies plus China and India. And we found that social enterprises tend to work in education, information technology, retail, and tend to attract founders from different age groups, as well as have a greater gender balance in founders than one would see in other sectors. And with that, I will hand it back to Ruth to close.
Okay, well, this is just to say that everyone has a role to play, and we need to work together to improve, to up our game. So what can governments do? Governments can put in place better regulations for the reasons we discussed, better taxes for the reasons we discussed. Government signaling is very important. And so a clear, consistent message about embracing civil society and the role of the social sector is really important and should be consistent throughout all government policies. Businesses can do a lot too. They can provide funding, they can provide skills transfer, and they can engage in partnerships with the government and with nonprofit organizations. And what can social sector organizations do? We're really talking about the role of government here, but we tell nonprofits that it is incumbent on themselves to tell their story better, to be more accountable, to publish their annual report, to tell people what their impact is so that they can build trust. And when social sector organizations partner with government and corporates, it's important for them to think, what is the agenda of our partners, not just what is my agenda? So that's our call to action, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ruth and Mavish, for the sharing of DGI finding just now. And if audience have any question, please comment in the section below, and our speaker will answer it during panel session or later after the session. With that, I would like to invite Ashran to moderate the barbecue and grill session. And Ashran, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Ashraf. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ruth and Mavesh, for that presentation just now. And for the audiences that we have here on Facebook Live. We're honored to have Datin Dr. Shahira from the Ministry of Entrepreneur, Development and Cooperative with us this morning. Thank you, Datin, for joining us. And we've got Ahmad Faris from Impact Malaysia, also with us this morning.
Hi.
Again, I think this ought to be a pretty awesome discussion, especially for Malaysia having viewed a budget that was presented last week only. And to kind of get the ball rolling, I'd like to put Dr. Shahira on air to kind of perhaps give her first impression and reaction with regards to the presentation or the report that was presented earlier on. Doctor?
Right. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ashrans, and thank you, CAPS, for presenting an executive summary of the reports of DGI 2020. Okay, my first impression is that CAPS has done a very good job in coming out with this index because it can become an input to the government, especially in policymakers, in knowing what is it that we have done okay and what are the areas that we need to improve on. At least we don't have to wait until the last year after to know whether we're doing good or not. Nevertheless, when I read this report, I'm quite amazed or not so happy when I see that Malaysia's position has been going down from doing better to doing okay. But not to be defensive, I actually look at all the dimensions and the sub-dimensions that Malaysia is doing well, as well as areas that Malaysia needs to improve on. I might agree with a lot of it, but I also have questions as well to CAPS in how do you come up with some of the conclusions. And as pointed out by CAPS, I think the governments of Malaysia really appreciate the social sector. And with the COVID-19, it is becoming more important and timely for the government to work hand in hand with the social sector, as we don't want anybody to be left behind. As many of you know that COVID-19 has changed the landscape of our economy, of our social development. And if we are not careful, it will actually widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So as a general reactions to performance of Malaysia, I agree that there are a lot that the government can do in terms of improving the regulatory framework. In this respect, when Malaysia is showing that it is lack of law enforcement, my comment is that a detailed analysis should actually be done as in what areas that the law of enforcement is lacking. I asked questions before this when it comes to social sector, which ministry is taking the lead, which authority is taking a lead. So unless that gray area is being answered, it will be very difficult for us to just say in general there is a lack of enforcement. And I know that as a government, we doesn't want our law or our regulations to become a hindrance to develop our social sector. We are looking at regulations as facilitating the sector instead of punishing the sector. And I was happy that you take note that 57% of Malaysia's SDO has bought, but they don't really declare their annual reports. Against, we need to actually see the pro and cons of mandating them to do that, because we want more people to be involved in the social sector. We don't want to actually create the impressions that government is actually trying to find fault with us. But again, we have to balance it out, because we need to have trust to those who wants to donate their money to the social sector. In terms of tax and fiscal incentive, I have to declare that I'm not an expert in terms of tax, and that is not my forte. Nevertheless, I agree that this should be looked into in greater details, especially with those ministries who are actually taking care of the tax, which is Ministry of Finance. Now, on my perspective is that in MEDAC, actually, we don't want our organizations, for example, our social enterprise, to be too dependent on donation. Because in the first place, why we want to encourage social sector? Because we want the social sector to complement the gaps that the government is not being able to provide to the society, because resources are limited, and we should actually try to avoid to the point that we are giving too much, to the extent that it will actually create a subsidy mentality among our social sector. And that is why I think in MIDAP, we would like, I personally would like to see and to engage more with our social sector, for them to be imbued with some business acumen and entrepreneurship knowledge, for them to be financially sustainable, despite the fact that they are non-profits. I think when we look at the level of giving in Malaysia, you pointed out that 2/3 of SDO believe that individual giving is low, but I refuse to accept the fact that we Malaysians is stingy and we don't want to donate. But when I look at some of the three main reasons why SDOs feel it's like that, the first is they say because people may not have enough to donate, could be true. Second, because there are not so much tax incentive in place. Third is because they prefer to donate to religious organizations. So I wanted to actually discuss more on the third reason, of which I believe in Malaysia, the majority of us are Muslims, and we are actually obligated under the Islamic principles to actually give out some portions of our incomes to zakat or to alms. And I personally myself prefer to give it to that channel. First, because I don't want to go to, of course, everybody wants to go to heaven. So this is the one of the things that we must do as a Muslim. So I do it. And second, again, it comes back that whenever I give to alms or to zakat, I get 100% tax deductions. And there is, and why I feel safe to donate my money, because government make it easy for me to do that, because there is one organization, we call it the arms organizations, that actually make sure that our contributions is being taken care of. And for government officers like me, I even have a choice and options to actually deduct my salary to go straight away to pay my responsibility as a Muslim. So for me, if I have a choice either to pay for income tax or to pay to zakat, I would prefer to do it to zakat, because it is, I know that the money will actually go to the people in needs. So again, maybe it is give us some kind of like potential for SEOs to actually work maybe with some religious organizations. I know that is not difficult. This is not easy to do, but it is not impossible to do as well. So I leave it to that first, Ashrat, to give ways for other people to make comments.
No. I think that was a pretty awesome baseline and entry into it on things. Covering actually quite a variety of aspects, and I'm not even sure where to start off in activating the next course of discussion. But I guess if I can take it back to CAPS, either Ruth or Mavesh, to then kind of react to some of the things that was put forward. And I think they're all very, very pertinent points that was highlighted, and we can easily, dissect each one of those points in this short session that we have. Let me throw it over to Ruth.
I can comment on some of that. You did do quite a buffet table. I'll leave the carbs. I'll leave the carbs to Mavesh.
And reading our report so closely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I of course, zakat plays an extraordinary role in Malaysia, and I think that I have been fortunate to be able to participate in a number of discussions about even Islamic finance and how it can play much more of a role in impact investing than it is now. So there's a lot of opportunity within kind of the rules of Islamic finance to do more. In terms of zakat, I think that you're right. It's easier to give. But most of those yayasans are not very transparent themselves. And you're absolutely right that they tend not to partner, and they're prescribed in terms of what they can and could do. And one small anecdote is that there are 5 foodstuffs that are part of the assignment of giving to the poor. One of them is sugar. And Malaysia has a problem with obesity and malnutrition. Many people don't realize you can be obese and malnourished at the same time. And sugar doesn't necessarily help with that, but they are obligated to give sugar as one of their charitable offerings. So I think there's opportunity for organizations that are working in nutrition and maternal and child health to partner with those yayasans, especially the state ones, to do a better job of addressing the health and nutrition needs of people in Malaysia. So that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's the kind of issue that everyone could get their arms around and agree with, and that we could really make some helpful changes. And then in terms of collaboration, I think the match program, which I think, Ashran, you're going to explain more, is a really great step toward increased collaboration. We are doing a study right now, and it includes a look at something called Yayasan Amir, which was created by Khazanah. It's a nonprofit. It gets corporate support from from Khazanah, but other companies. It also has a social enterprise part of it, Leap Ed. So it is a really great example in Malaysia of every type of social activity in one universe, in one ecosystem addressing education. And I think that there are terrific models that can be emulated in other areas as well.
If I can just add to that quickly on the
Go ahead, Mahesh.
Dr. Shahira, it's Malaysia. The issue with religious giving generally, and this is not just true in Malaysia, but all kinds of religious giving, whether it's Hindu giving or Catholic giving or Buddhist giving, has been that a lot of this giving is outside the formal checks and balances that are usually in place for philanthropy and charitable, other kinds of charitable giving. Having said that, Malaysia and actually Indonesia there's a more formalized system of zakat there, and the potential for collaboration, at least from where I'm sitting, seems to be much greater, for bringing zakat into the more, or blending, maybe coming up with a new kind of blend between religious giving and non-religious giving. The country where I'm from, Pakistan, people prefer to never give zakat to government institutions because the level of trust in those institutions actually using that money is zero. So, Malaysia is actually way ahead of that kind of thinking. So there's a lot of potential there. And I quickly wanted to go back to your social enterprises point and this idea of them becoming very dependent on donations, and just quickly reference the study that we did earlier. This is one of the most nefarious and widespread perceptions that we found exist about social enterprises in Asia, that they may become too subsidy dependent and that they will never wean themselves off that and learn to stand on their own 2 feet, whereas that is what they are supposed to be doing. From our survey, where we again surveyed hundreds of early stage social enterprises, we found that they are very aware of this. Half of them, even at the early stage, were profitable, and all of them were intending to be profitable. So they, regardless of the perception of investors and others, they are very aware that they need to stand on their own 2 feet. That's one. But a little addition to that is that at the same time, we found that grants actually do play a critical role at the very early stage by acting as angel investment that allows these organizations that are actually have a very difficult mandate to make money and to do good, to do them both together, intertwine them. That's a very difficult mandate. And at the beginning, like all startups, they will fail, they will pivot, they will need to learn. And that is where grants can really act as angel investment and help them do that and kind of, grow their wings before they can fly on their own. So I just want to leave you with that thought.
Great stuff. Med, your thoughts on the discussion so far? Then?
Right. Thanks, Ashran. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marhapan, for having me back again this week. If you ask me, I don't mind just listening to the conversation, but I will try my best to add a couple more things to what has been spoken about. But before that, I think it's important for me to admit that I'm in an awkward position today, being an agency under the Ministry of Youth and Sports, listening to two big authority here today. So I guess what I'm going to do is put myself closer to the grassroots, to the NGO people that we work with. Although in the end, it's unfortunate that we are in the middle and stuck. So we understand the issues with the government side and also at the NGO side. But I'll try to address that as much as possible. In fact, the three things I would like to address as to what Dr. Shahira has spoken about, two of which were addressed by CAPS, but I do have a different position. So the two things that I will address is definitely on the social sector being very, dependent on subsidy by the government. I'll address that shortly. Second is on the tax incentive, but here I run the risk of being a bit too against, religious authority. So I will promise to behave. And lastly, but which I'll go first, on the gray area, onto the having a centralized body or department or ministry to talk about social sector. Because that was funny, Shahira, you mentioned that, because that was the last bit that Ashran mentioned in our last forum, a need for it to be centralized, because I believe in that very much, to be honest. And although I was not part of the government or government agency, I still am not part of government per se, government agency before, when there was NBOS and when there was, if I'm mistaken, a social department in every ministry, correct me if I'm wrong, to Shahira, I thought that was a step forward in solving this. Because for us to have a ministry to only deal with DGI or sustainability or social, I guess it's difficult because there's plenty, because in the third sector is huge. And similar to how Ministry of Youth and Sports is centralized, all the youth issues is centralized under youth and sports. But in the end, every other ministry has issues pertaining youth, and therefore you have one ministry perhaps that will work as a central body or a secretary of sort. But in the end, it exists in different ministry. But having said that, I agree nonetheless there must be a centralized or a structure to ensure that people can talk about it. So that's why I said perhaps how NBOS or how Department of Social exists in the past, how we had that before, perhaps is something that we can do. So maybe I will then go back to the Shahira. If there is one, what would you suggest? And as an agency, I would definitely support it, because I do think that there needs to be one. That's the first thing that I would like to respond to. The first one is on this whole, subsidy mentality. I agree. And I think I've also made my position very clear, and I'm similar to Dr. Shahira and CAPS as well, that NGO and social sector or SDO should be more financially sustainable. But this is where I will play my role as a body that is in between both government and the NGO sector. Because it's unfortunate. In the end, the conversation is about bureaucracy versus efficiency. In all honesty, the conversation, knowing that, because I'm working closely with government as well, and I know how NGO behaves too, government will always see it as, this is another more work for us. We already have tons, and now you're adding more work. That's why there's some reluctance on their end, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. I know it's true that government has a lot of work, and on the other hand, NGOs will always feel like, we don't want to work with government, there's too much paperwork, they don't understand enough. So with these two mentality and point of view, the need for someone in the middle to bridge both is more crucial than ever, for us to translate as to the amount of work the government is doing and to take some of those burden, and at the same time to tell NGOs that government understands, they want to, you unfortunately have to, fill up those paperwork. So as a agency in the middle, I will definitely say and request for the government to perhaps look into something more, something less bureaucratic, and for NGOs to at least give it a shot. At the same time, it's also unfortunate that some NGOs find any paperwork is too much because they already are on the ground and dealing with the people directly. So any paperwork, even to do impact assessment, is too much. So I guess, in like I said, a body in the middle to do most of the secretarial, and but for both to have come to the table and find room and agree as to a more efficient method can make it easier. But in the end, NGOs will always look into government for more money. At the same time, will tell you that there's too much paperwork, and government will always see that as too much work. Something has to happen in between. And lastly, on the tax incentive, this is difficult. I completely understand where Shaira is coming from, that in the end, it's easier to just pay zakat. But as for me, I think doing good or altruism or social work has to go beyond religion. Because in the end, doing good may not necessarily mean, can not only always translate to pahala or, what do you call that, rewards in the afterlife. It must also be translated to doing good today to, other human beings beyond whatever religion. And of course, zakat or any other religious institution will, look at it from a religious standpoint. But I think the rise of NGOs and social enterprise and everyone doing good, that is, not discriminatory or that is beyond religion, is something that should be celebrated. And I will also agree that I'm no expert in tax, but to make it easier beyond only paying to religious institution is definitely a thing that has to happen fast, because otherwise then we'll always look at it from a religious standpoint. That's what I have for now. I have plenty more, but I'll leave it to the rest first.
Cool. No. Perfect here. I would like to swing back to Dr. Shahira then. I mean, we've got your activation just now and CAPS responding and Matt responding also. Any other context that you'd like to add on, Doctor, or?
Okay, just responding back to Max's points in terms of one-stop center and which agency should actually take a lead. As pointed out that social initiatives cut across ministries and agencies. So personally, if you ask me, the best, this is my personal opinions, I might get into trouble by saying this, the best ministry to actually take a lead is actually the economic planning units, because they are the sectoral agencies and they are looking at the development of the country cut across economic, social, and environment. Because if we have EPU to play that role, it will be easier for all stakeholders, including the policymakers, in terms of coming up with the regulatory framework as well as initiative. There is no redundancy, there is no silo is working. For example, when Ministry of Entrepreneur Developments is re-established, we can see there is more concerted effort to actually promote social enterprise. Because now, for example, there are more than, I think, 11 ministries and agencies who are looking into social enterprise. And recently, we have established a social enterprise development committee to oversee different initiatives and programs undertaken by different ministries and agencies, so that we can actually work together and actually pool our resources for better impact. In terms of how to make people more excited to contribute to the social sector, I always believe in anything that we want to do, we have to start from young. And the best way for us to do it is through our education system. I think in Malaysia, every child in Malaysia has access to free education. So all this kind about saying that it's difficult for the SDOs to attract talents because there are perceptions that they will pay, the talents will be paid less if they work with NGOs or non-profits. This could be tackled through educating our youngs. Sometimes, there is a say in Malay saying that we are too old, just forget about them. There's nothing much that you can do, but we can start, spending times on our youth, on our younger generations, and one day they become parents, they become the leaders, and we'll be living in a different world. And in terms of CAPS, as pointed out, in terms of the importance of grants, I agree that there should be some injections from the government to show that government cares, to signal that this is important. Again, when we want to offer interventions, especially in terms of grants, we have to be very careful for it to be targeted. When I say targeted, we need to know in what areas that the grants is for, that can actually contribute to an impact, and as well as who are the beneficiaries. Are the grants for SDOs or to NGOs to make difference to the society? Because we do have findings when we give grants to SDOs. It turns out it helps more to the SDOs to be sustainable and to be rather than making more impact to the beneficiaries, which is the rakyat or the people. So again, that's why I think in budget 2021, the government has actually make it more important for us to work with the civil societies, with the NGOs, with this corporate social responsibility. For the first time, I see it is put it visibly in the budget speech. If you look at the objective 3, it's economic resilience, and it is put under economic resilience, you know, which is very, very interesting. And in number 1, government specifically said that we want to work closely with NGOs and with the social enterprise, and they have allocated 100 million matching grants for I think that they 50 million for generations of employment as well as income, 30 million for initiatives to overcome issues, social issues, and 20 million for environmental care efforts. Again, the effectiveness of matching grants, just to share, when we do analysis on impact, it so happened that whatever that we put as matching, the rate of response is a bit slow. It means that they don't want to do matching. Again, that bring back to my point of subsidy mentality. If you want to have something, you should give something in return. So we don't want SDOs to become not good in itself, in the sense that, yeah, we want something, but you just have to give that to us because we're doing it for you. So again, why is it that whenever that governments come up with matching grants, the take-up rate is a bit low as compared to giving free handouts or free cash? I open up for
no, that's awesome. I want to kind of carry that through a little bit in terms of that matching aspect, which I thought was interesting also. And I don't know whether Ruth or Mavesh, can you share whether in other parts of the region, what approach has been taken? Because I resonate with what Dr. Shaira was saying in terms of having that balancing act and kind of using it as a filtering mechanism also in terms of the genuineness of that entity that's trying to proliferate doing good. Ruth?
Well, I want to thank you. And I think I would just want to, before I talk about matching, I want to say that we also agree that a one window entity is a really good idea and streamlines a number of these decisions. And just like in a company now, you are having from the CEO, from the C-suite, ESG regulations looking across the whole company. In some ways, the government needs to look across the whole government and see what's the role of nonprofits, what's the role of social enterprise, what's the role of CSR. And in that, you really need to have a conversation about what is the role of these different entities. So there are certain problems that can't be addressed through a business model. And so they lend themselves more to nonprofits than to social enterprises. Or there is the role of philanthropy, for example, one of its biggest roles is to be the risk capital to do something innovative, to do a pilot, to do something before the government picks it up. So you really need to be clear. Not all of these organizations should be doing exactly the same thing and competing with each other. They each have comparative strengths and advantages. And so it's really important to think about a portfolio approach to solving problems, and a single window entity could really be useful in thinking that through. in terms of match, in terms of, I guess, subsidy, I think that there are many types of these, matching formulas in place. There's also efforts to really have national giving days, and where you're trying to generate a lot of funding. In China, both Tencent and Alibaba have these days where everybody's giving, and that creates enormous amount of money that's going into the sector. There are we need, before you put into place policies, that has a lot of P's in it. Before you put into place policies, you need to really think about what these look like, how they complement each other, and what the ramifications are. Crowdfunding is terrific, but what it does is it funds heartstring type of projects. So when a child needs an operation, or when somebody's hungry, those things get funded very readily. But if you're looking at infrastructure building or research or less emotional types of projects that are still important, those are hard to fund through crowdfunding. You need, crowdfunding has its role. Social enterprises has its role. We just need to be really thoughtful about who's doing what.
No, sorry.
And if I can narrow the, what Ruth was saying a little bit to for-profit social enterprises, because I think that's where a lot of these issues of subsidies and, we want, they are much more likely to attract private investment. So that's where these questions become a lot more relevant as well. So I just want to narrow the focus to that and talk a little bit about what the role of government there can be, according to what we have found out. And it would be great to hear from Med and Dr. Shahira what their perspective on this is, and then also the role that impact investors can play. On the role of government, we found an overwhelming demand across the 8 economies that we looked at for the government's avatar to be one of an enabler, not one of a funder, not anything specific. But they really want government to enable business, make it easy to do business, to enable capital flows, make it easy for impact investment domestically to come in as well as from abroad, and to just generally make it easy for small businesses to succeed, to maybe have tax breaks for small businesses, regardless of whether they are social enterprises or not. Because anything more the government wants to do, and I think there was a proposal, I don't know if this has actually happened, that there was in Malaysia to provide income tax deductions or donations to social enterprises. As Dr. Shahira rightly pointed out, that's taxpayers' money. There's a lot of scrutiny on that. And then also it begs the question, what is a social enterprise? And in this very nascent growing field, there is a lot of disagreement on what social enterprises are. And the question is it too early to settle on a definition? And I can share the example of one country that has in Asia, and that's Korea. Korea defined a social enterprise, attached subsidies, tax breaks, grants, capital to it, flowing from government to them. And to date, only about 2,000 plus social ventures have chosen to officially certify themselves as social enterprises.
Which is less than half.
No, which is like tens of thousands don't want this label, because they don't want to deal with the scrutiny, with the requirements that come with it. And also they feel that they may not fit into the definition. In fact, the Korean government is now considering expanding the spectrum of social enterprises because they weren't able to envelope as many as they wanted in this. So, the role of government can be nuanced, strategic, multi-pronged, does not have to be as a funder. And the second thing is, when it comes to matching, who is going to match these funds? That's probably going to be the private sector. Within the private sector, that can be companies or it can be impact investors. In Malaysia, we do see companies, we see that CSR is beginning to extend to social entrepreneurship. Alliance Bank, I think, incubates social enterprises. Maybank is developing talent through social entrepreneurship. The question we ask of impact investors is, we notice across the region that there's a lot of desire on the part of wealthy individuals and investors to become impact investors. But there are a couple of things that are holding them back. One, again, there's a lot of confusion. What does impact investment mean?
Right.
Two,
I was about to say that, yeah.
the traditional capital markets model is not kind to early stage startups. It does not provide loans or investment at the early stage. So unless impact investors develop a broader approach to investment and then are able to, in their return calculations, put an impact significantly and clearly, it's going to continue to be an impediment to them jumping in at the stage that Dr. Shahira is talking about.
Right. A lot of impact investors think they should get market returns for their investment, which precludes early stage right from the get-go.
But some are willing to accept others, except they don't know then how to calculate this composite return.
Right.
Market percent. Someone should do that work.
Ahmed
Yes.
Matt's like, oh,
Yeah, I've been wanting to jump in. I love the conversation, and it's perfect. That's what that Mevesh brought in impact investment, because that's what really I want to add into the conversation. Because in regards to giving out grants and expecting, as per what Dr. Shahira said, giving out grants, and when they cannot find that the take-up is low because they cannot find a matching grant, the reason behind it is because it's very chicken and egg situation. As in, for them to get this grant, I must get this grant. So when they go and present to a GLC or a foundation, or that we can get your grant if we do get this grant, you get what I mean? It's very chicken and egg. But impact investment, or essentially investment, or is much better, because at least it provides flexibility, and it's also reactionary in a way, because then they get to do their work and then ensure that they will be able to provide their returns to the benefactor. And of course, we'll speak further about what the returns will be, what impact essentially entails, which I can try to answer later. But point is, I would love to suggest that we look into a different method rather than giving out matching grants, to impact invest instead. And for the government, then it's great that you get to see the returns financially. And of course, it should be much less than what the private investor would ever expect, or any impact investor also don't expect, market returns, but expect something less lower. But if you can at least get some returns, that's great. But more importantly is the impact that you're looking at. So I'll get to that shortly. But first, I just want to comment on to also what Dr. Shahira mentioned earlier, that education is important in respect to retaining or nurturing talents. And I agree with that. But on top of that, what Impact Malaysia is doing, we want to look at it from a cultural standpoint. So beyond educating the young to become, socially conscious and all that, which I think is already happening. If you compare generation, Gen Z is a lot more politically aware and socially aware as well. They're no longer loyal to brands, for example. So like say they love H&M, but the moment they realize that H&M is, using labor in third world countries, and where there is abuse there, for example, they will just stop immediately supporting H&M, and they will look into brands that are more socially conscious, that do, say, for example, invest to environmental protection and whatnot. So that's Gen Z. So I think in a way, education that may not exist in Malaysian education, but exists due to the global media consumption by Gen Z today, they're exposed to all of this, and they are inspired by Greta Thunberg, for example, and many more. So education is working, may not necessarily mean has to happen through formal education. It's already happening. And for me, I think has to happen a lot more through cultural shift. And this is where Impact Malaysia comes in, because we believe that everyone, the NGO and also government, has to look at impact as a culture. That means every time when you do things, it has to go beyond being obsessed towards output alone or pahala in this regard, and to look into what change that you will bring to the table. And the impact, culturalizing impact here also means that we're able to assess impact, and that's when we can then channel the information to impact investor and to see how really their returns or their money that they invest in will translate. So that's first one on education, which is, I think it's better, it's already existing. And next is to change the culture of the people. So going back to impact investment earlier, and I also love it that when Dr. Shahira mentioned before the forum that she wants to know methodology, I would love to have a meeting with you, Dr. Shahira, beyond this forum and explain to you what we are doing. And I also agree with you that EPU should be the central body. They can do it. We've presented this thing we call Product Eye to a meeting with EPU and EAC where Tokpa chaired it. But it's not enough. There's not been a follow-up meeting. But if you allow us to have a more standing in the third sector, will be more than happy to assist and facilitate the process for NGOs to assess their impact and for impact investors to look into ways that they get to measure and get returns. To sum it up, I would strongly say that again, matching grants work, but I think it's a thing in the past. The chicken and egg situation makes it difficult for people to obtain matching grants because in the end, no one knows what's going to happen. But unless if you put some trust and that investment, even if at an early stage, and this will further promote the whole being financially sustainable, because there has to be a model in the end as to how you can get a return. And on top of that, how do you measure the return beyond the financial returns, which is the impact returns. Yeah, that's it from me. Happy to have this conversation. Love to have a follow-up discussion beyond with both CAPS as well as MIDAC.
No, thanks, Matt, on that. But one of the things that's kind of recurring in all the conversations that I noticed also is that, and a little bit what Mebash was saying just now, a lot of this centers around definitions of terminologies that's been thrown within the sector itself, right? And there's no anchor around it. Well, I am also for having definitions anchored so that there's clarity or common clarity, but sometimes these definitions stifle the truest of intent that you're trying to achieve. You label SE, then there's a certain frame that what can and cannot be done. You put impact investing because there's the word investment there, then there are certain groups that expects a certain returns and so forth with regards to that. So that's good conversations. But to be frank, I don't know how we can kind of loosen up being too fixated by labels, while at the same time, and Ruth has an answer for that, there is a need for label for common understanding. Ruth.
It wasn't that long ago, maybe 30 years, where you had on one side nonprofits and philanthropy, and you had on the other side, companies and private investment. And there was nothing in the middle, right? That has changed dramatically. Right. So, social enterprises, social entrepreneurship, impact investing, social impact bonds, all of this, even, venture philanthropy, all of these are in the middle, somewhere in the middle, right? And I think that we need to encourage this kind of experimentation and innovation in terms of using financial instruments like profit and, shared value and returns, at the same time as encouraging on the organizational side, nonprofits, social enterprises, other types of entities. So the way to do it is to just be really thoughtful about limiting a pool of resources, being very thoughtful about, how much money, what types of money are you going to put at risk to allow that experimentation to go forward. But I think that we need to find all those really exciting innovations that are taking place and also draw in young people, because all of a sudden you can do good and do well. That's kind of a pretty attractive promise if it can be done. So I think we need to embrace this innovation, not try to constrain it and regulate it too much, but limit our risk so that we feel comfortable doing that.
Cool. So we've got about 15 minutes to go, and there's a bunch of questions that's coming from Facebook. So I'm going to look at addressing some of them. And so there's a question from Sanu: how SEs can have a chance to work directly with the ministries that relates back to social issues that SE is tackling. I think the core part of the question is, and perhaps this is either Dr. Shahira or Matt, SEs feels that they can solve a problem if they work better with the ministry. The question is, how best can they outreach to ministries? It's a very broad question there, but if anyone wants to take a quick stab at it before we move on to the next question.
Okay, I can actually take up that questions, but before I take up that question, just a quick response to Cap's points that government should act as an enabler. I couldn't agree more. That's why I'm quite surprised, Ruth, to see that the results of SDGI said that not so many SDO was get to be involved in policy making, because I know that for sure at MIDAC, we are trying to outreach as many stakeholders as we wish. So maybe after this, I'll get a list from my Harapans for them to be involved in our next coming policy, which is on SE blueprints.
Good. That would be great.
That would be,
Yeah.
then you'll jump up in 2022.
Yep, straight away to doing best.
Yes.
Back to the questions on SEs. I think, you know, like before I work in Ministry of Higher Education, every time I have to argue with academic, they will always come up with definitions for months and months. And I said that, can we just forget for a while about definition and just do the jobs? So while it's the same thing here, I agree with Kat's of the finding that you refer to in South Korea. We find that since, for example, social enterprise is quite new to many of us, although Malaysia has done quite well as compared to other ASEAN countries, there is an ASEAN report saying that Malaysia score higher than the median of all ASEAN countries in terms of social enterprise. So we look at the moment, we don't have a legal definition, but we do have some working definition on SEs. And we have done some study with the British councils, and the study shows that if we have a very narrow definitions, we might not be able to create excitements among people to be involved. So if you ask me in terms of our way forward at MIDAC, we will actually review in terms of our definition. We want it to be a bit more inclusive rather than what we have in SE accreditation at the moment, because at this point of time, we want to create excitement and we want everyone to feel that they are part of this. So when you have a very narrow definition for you to become exclusive to a group saying that I'm accredited, I'm not. So you're creating some kind of an elite group, of which that is not what we want to do at the moment. And getting back to the questions about how best the social sector, including SEs, to approach government ministries. I know that you might find it a bit bureaucratic to find the right person for you to approach. My advice is that it depends on what area that you want to focus on. If it is youth, please go ahead to Ministry of Youth. It's about SEs, or it's about business, or it's about cooperative, by all means, please approach me. And my team is more than willing to assist and work together with you. We have come up with a new program. For example, we have SE basic training, and we're going to roll out programs under the recovery plan for SEs, is Recovery Initiative for Social Enterprise. We hope to get it rolled by next week. And as mentioned, I'm not sure whether I mentioned it, we are in the process of coming up with the SE blueprint. And here I would like to open up to welcome everyone to be part of the team, to actually give us input and to tell us what is it at the ground level. Matt, you are so lucky you are at the ground level. So I don't want, she doesn't want to be seen as top down. But sometimes when you actually sit in my place, it's like when you're a parent, you have 3 children and you have to balance the needs of each one of your children. And you know that everyone have different needs, everyone have different characteristics. So you want it to be fair, but I know it's very difficult to be fair. But again, as a parent, you have to be open to listen to your children on what they want, but doesn't necessarily that is what they need. So I believe that we should open up a lot of platform for us to communicate, and I'm sure with digitalizations, it make it easier for us to communicate. So I'll get back later on in terms of procurement. Let Ashran to go through the other questions first.
Cool stuff.
Can I
So we've
jump in?
got
Can I jump in quickly to answer? No, not
yes,
to
you
the
can.
Shahira. Thank you, the Shahira. You said amazing things. But since we have 9 more minutes and you have a meeting at 11:30, Doctor,
Yeah.
so we'll have to wrap it up quick. I just want to answer quickly to Sano from DMT. Discover Muay Thai is at our office. So Sano, their chairman is, sorry, the advisor is our chairman, said Azmi. So it's always been, quite funky for us to ever really work together. But Sano, if you'd like to meet with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and please write to us officially. I will see if I can take you to Ministry of Youth and Sports because they never write to me officially. We've had casual conversations. Sano was my coach actually. I learned a little bit of Muay Thai.
So
But point is,
lesson learned here is, express yourself, outreach, write officially.
formally, it has to
Yeah.
be it, and use the door that you have, open as many doors as possible. So at this point, Impact Malaysia to Youth and Sports, use agencies. You have to write to agencies, and I'm sure there'll be ways lah. The last bit, that I really want to respond. I think there are questions from Rizal, my colleague. I'll leave it to Caps if you want to answer that. Just a bit about Dasrik. Yeah, I think true. So more public-private partnership has to be it. That model has to be done in such a in a mid or long-term timeline. Because if everything, I think this is a problem, a systemic problem. Because in the end, financial budgeting works in a year. So therefore, for us to invest this year and expect it in 3 years' time, just midterm enough, is too long. But again, this goes back to the obsession that everything can't be so quick and we have to take some time. But communication goes a long way. So as for me, that has to happen, a more mid and long term, but people really has to be patient. Otherwise, and otherwise nothing can happen. I know I'm not really adding on to anything much. I just wanted to...
I have one thing to say about public-private partnerships.
Yeah, go ahead.
That term was originally coined to talk about things like toll roads and the building of ports. It was very clear what the role of the private sector was, and it was really clear what the role of the public sector was. And private sector had an economic incentive to engage. We noticed that in Asia, it's very, very, very common for government to be at the table, working with philanthropists, working with CSR, working with nonprofits from the get-go. And so we're actually doing a study, and Mevesh is heading this study on public-private partnerships for social good. And what are the strategies to increase on governance, on sustainability? What are the exit strategies for companies? You can't expect them to keep giving without any benefit going forward. So we're doing this study. That's why we know about Yayasan Amir and some other examples in Malaysia. And so what I would like to do is reconvene in 6 months' time when this study is completely finished and have a discussion about what are best practices when it comes to public-private partnerships for social good, because we'll have a lot to say about that, and we'd love to be able to engage.
Please invite us as well, Ruth.
Over Zoom anytime. But I see the guitar in the background. You might have to play for us if you.
All right. Thank you, speakers. Now you have 5 minutes left to wrap this up. Thank you so much just now. Yes, Ashraf.
Thanks, Ashraf. That's our reminder that we've got 5 minutes to go and to have concluding remarks, essentially. I think the conversation, it's really awesome. This is the second session that we're doing this, and the flow of context, depending on the group that we have, just goes from one to the other. And I think, Doctor, you started off really well at the baseline, covering all the necessary trigger points that we need to look at addressing. And I think, it touched quite nicely in terms of the various aspects of DGI and what the government is doing at this particular moment itself. I think the signal, to use the word from CAP's report, looks very positive, but I think the engagement needs to just go at a more granular level, so that whatever we talk that sounds similar in terms of intent gets executed in the truest manner for the impact that we all desire, essentially. With 4 minutes left, I'll go around the Zoom room and give everyone their quick 1 minute parting remarks.
Okay, well, I'll start. I just want to say, Dr. Shahira, that you should know that the area that drove the Malaysia finding down was ecosystem, not government. And so you're slightly off the hook here. But if you want to have more of a granular discussion about that, we are absolutely happy. CAPS is not an advocacy organization and we're not a think tank, but we do research that is meant to be a resource to policymakers, philanthropists, and companies, and the public at large. And so that is a driver of the reason behind why we do the studies we do, just so that we can all improve and do a better job in helping communities' needs. So we welcome these conversations and the opportunity to share our findings.
And I'll add very quickly on that all of our research is actually available online. It's available for free. And Dr. Shahira, this is the social enterprises study that I think would be great. Again, I'm blown away that you read the Doing Good Index with so much attention, and perhaps we'll have a chance to discuss the Business for Good social enterprises findings as well.
Cool. Matt, I'll leave the last piece to Doctor.
Yes, I'm just really looking forward to meet Doctor. So whenever you're free, I'd just like to quickly promote as well something that we're currently doing, just called Academy Kilat. You can look up the URL bit.ly/AKADEMIKILAT 2020. We are doing a sprint on impact reporting. That's part of our capacity building that we do online. So if you're interested with anything similar, please do that. I just want to say this, that again, this is a great conversation. The thing that that I resonate quite a bit with Shaira earlier is that as a parent, you have many kids and you can't be, perhaps what you can do is to recognize more agencies. Currently, if you look at the budget, it's almost always going to Magic and MDEC. As a fellow agency, and I'm sure many other agencies are also getting bored. Like, you can't always go to Magic and MDEC, right? I'm sure they're also very busy already. We exist, and there are many other agencies that are also doing similar work. We exist as well. I would like to take some off, the load from Magic and MDEC. They are great people, of course, right? But I'm sure they're very busy. And in the end, when the mandate comes on, we call it Wahyu. When it comes on to the table, there's nothing that you can do but to just get it done. We'd love to offer a helping hand. So if we can come to the table, agencies, there are a couple more that I'm sure, and also GLCs as well. If we can be recognized and get that mandate to push through government agenda on this, I'm sure we'll do wonders for the nation and for the government as well. Looking forward to the conversation.
And Doctor.
Okay, I just to conclude on our discussions and the insights that I get from the presentations as well as the report from CAPS and Matt is that first, I think SDO really need to find ways to be financially sustainable without depending too much on donations. Maybe they can emulate the social enterprise concepts or even a cooperative. And I agree with CAPS that a lot of funding is a very capitalism oriented, especially in banks. You will have difficulty if you go to bank and ask for funding. And second is in terms of we need to promote and create more awareness through our educations and media coverage, because we need more role models with respect of doing good, especially among the younger generations. And third, a more organized and systematic social sector as a third sector in Malaysia. Yeah, maybe we can push this idea to EPU. Maybe we can invite them in the next sessions that we have. And we need to find a better, because we don't need a lot of people talking, but we need maybe 1 or 2 people who keep championing this, and this will happen. And of course, the fourth point is we need to foster public-private partnership. Again, I'm looking forward, CAPS. I love reading reports and do analysis on my free time. I do as well. And Matt, of course, I would love to engage with you. I'll make sure that we have some collaborative programs with you sometime next year for 2021. And for everybody out there as well, please be part of our SE blueprint, our upcoming SE blueprint. I think my team will be able to share with you more in terms of our engagement sessions. And thank you, Ashran.
All right, great. And so
Can we use
you
that
were talking about
quote?
that.
Can we use that quote for our social media? I love reading reports and your particularly.
Sure, not a problem. I might not be a good influencer though.
We'll help. It'll be a win-win.
Nice. Thank you, everyone. Over back to you, Ashraf.
Thank you, Ashran Dato' Ghazi, CEO of Datas, for moderating this session. And our fellow speakers, Datin Dr. Syahira Hamidun, Undersecretary Policy and Strategic Planning of MIDAT, Ahmad Faris Amir, CEO of Impact Malaysia, Ruth S. Shapiro, Co-founder and Chief Executive CAPS, Mehvish Mumtaz Ahmad, Director of Research CAPS. Thank you to all speakers and moderators. We hope the discussion did spark some insightful ideas and thoughts. And you spend your time, your knowledge, your experience that you shared just now. We want to thank you to all the audience that have been us from this morning. And if you have any further questions, please email to khadijah@mrharapan.org. The email will be shared in the comment section, and please do follow us in all social media platforms for more updates. So stay tuned for next discussion, probably in December, and have a great day and a week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thanks, guys.